Hey everybody, it's Brett, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Stack, where today I am sitting down with author Seán Hewitt for his debut fiction novel, Open Heaven. A little bit about Seán. He is a poet, memoirist, novelist, and literary critic. His debut collection of poetry, Tongues on Fire, won the Laurel Prize in 2021 and was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year Award, the John Pollard Foundation International Poetry Prize, and a Dalkey Literary Award. In 2020, he was chosen by the Sunday Times as one of their 30 under 30 artists in Ireland. His memoir, All Down Darkness Wide, was shortlisted for Biography of the Year at the An Post Irish Book Awards, for the Foyles Book of the Year for Nonfiction, for the RSL Anjanti Prize, the Polari Prize, the Michael Dayon Prize, and for a Lambda Award. He won the Rooney Prize for Irish Literature in 2022. He lives in Dublin, where he is also the assistant professor in literary practice at Trinity College and is a fellow of the Royal Society of London. So please enjoy this episode of Behind the Stack. I'm so pleased, so terribly happy to be sitting with Seán Hewitt today. Thank you so much for being here. Your debut fiction novel, because certainly you have many other published things. Look at this. We're Go Fish, right? It's just so incredibly beautiful. So thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me.
I just wanted to ask you a few things before we actually dive into the book. So I know I've caught you at the end of your workday. So you're an assistant professor at Trinity College in Dublin. How have you found that experience? Do you enjoy teaching?
It depends what time of day you ask me, but yeah, I do enjoy it. I used to teach literature, like straight literature, but now I've moved over to the creative writing department. So that's really helpful because I get to just speak to students who are writing novels or poems or whatever, and it keeps my head in that space all day, and we have great conversations as well. So yeah, it's good. I enjoy it. You can probably hear I'm at the building that I work in is the building where Oscar Wilde was born. So I'm in the attic, which is, probably there should be a portrait around here somewhere. But he was born here in 2 rooms below me, and you can probably hear the seagulls as well. I'm sorry about that.
No, I actually don't. Every now and then I hear something which almost sounds like if you were in a car, I'd say it sounds like that noise, but there's no.
That's because it's been raining all day and there are buses driving past. But we're used to rain.
Oh, that's probably what it is. But I don't hear the seagulls at all. So, but that sounds very kind of gothic and romantic.
Yeah, it's nice occasionally.
It feels very appropriate for a literature professor.
Yeah, it worked out well.
So you started as a poet, and then you had published a memoir, All Down Darkness Wide, and this is your first fiction book. How has that experience been, kind of traversing over these different types of literature and writing?
Fun. I guess unexpected. I think the novel was very different to poetry and a memoir for me. I think maybe it's to do with the sort of way I'd always approach poetry, which is that it is kind of coming from life in a way. And then the memoir, obviously it has like real life as the thing that you're working with. Whereas with the novel, as obvious as it sounds, you get to make stuff up. And that began as actually the most terrifying thing about the novel, or writing a novel, because there's so many moments at which you can kind of doubt yourself as a grown adult sitting in a room and just making up kind of characters, or, deciding what you're naming your imaginary dog for the character that day. And for a while that seems quite odd. And you can second guess yourself. But then the lovely thing I discovered was that maybe a couple of months in, the novel begins to feel as real life to you.
Mm.
So it doesn't feel like you're making it up anymore. You're kind of just listening in to, well, what would this character be thinking? I feel like I know this person. So you kind of wander around the streets with the characters still as real people in your head, which sounds all very airy-fairy. And if someone had have said that to me before I wrote the novel, I would have said that sounds like you're just making it up. But I can attest that it's true.
Yeah, I don't think it sounds strange though, because I think it's almost very much like an actor, where the further you immerse yourself, the more the characters start to inform you and tell you certain things.
Yeah,
And it's almost in a way like being a medium.
it is very
and
like being
kind of just bringing it out.
Yeah. I think because one of the interesting things is when you start writing characters, they're quite two-dimensional. Or you have them so complex that you can't quite get a handle on how they would react to a certain situation. And after a while, they become so obvious to you what that character would say or do, or how they would react to something. So it's just like writing about someone who actually exists. But I suppose the nice thing about writing a novel is that all of this stuff that you carry entirely in your head for 3 years or something, these people that you made up, everyone else gets to get to know them now. So it kind of feels a bit strange to me when, for example, you've read the novel, James and Luke now, and for a while they were only in my head. So now it kind of feels like we have friends in common or something.
Yes, and somebody, another writer once said, this is now a whole different experience because of the sharing of it, and because it's now out in the world, and suddenly people are having reactions to what only you've known.
Yeah, and I think you also get the sense of learning a lot about the thing that you made up from readers. Readers will tell you things that they noticed that almost were so latent in your own head as you were writing them that you feel like you're learning about the characters still from what readers say. If that
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I imagine it's a little bit like being able to see the forest through the trees.
Yeah.
And then suddenly somebody says, oh, this really stood out to me.
Mm.
Are you someone do you structure everything, and do you have a whole trajectory of where everyone's going, or is it a combination of kind of the characters begin to inform as you go along?
I had a kind of basic structure. So the novel is set over 4 seasons, as you know. We kind of start in the autumn, winter, spring, summer. And I had that idea in my head very early on. And in some way that kind of informed how I wrote it. I tried to write the season that I was in, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow.
I began autumn in the autumn, and drafted the first draft of the novel through the 4 seasons. And I think I had a general plot plan that then I dispensed with in various ways and made up new things as I went. And it was more a case of, before you know the characters, or before you've kind of got halfway into the novel, it's impossible for me to know where the plot goes, because you're still discovering things. And then it seems so, if I'd have decided that they go to Paris or something, it would have just made no sense by the time I got halfway into the book. Of course they don't go to Paris, and I'm not going to follow that plot point just because I put it in a structure. So some things became apparent to me only when I was kind of near finishing the first draft of the book, and then other parts of it I had to kind of elevate in a second draft, or try and put undertones of something in a second draft to suggest. I'm trying to not give spoilers away.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, so we've kind of talked around it, but for our viewers, for our listeners, do you have a sort of elevator pitch for the book?
I should have an elevator pitch.
This could be the testing. Is this the first conversation you've had about the book?
I've had 1 or 2, and I need to kind of properly stand in front of a mirror and do an elevator. The pitch is, so there are 2 boys. James, who is the main character, the one who's speaking to you. 15, 16, it's set in 2002. And he is gay and feeling kind of alone. He lives in a rural village. And he falls in love with a boy called Luke, who has been left by his mum has gone to France, and his father is in prison, and they've sent him to live with his aunt and uncle. And James falls in love with Luke and kind of projects every fantasy that he possibly could about what love is, what boys are, the kind of redemption that his life might undergo when he falls in love onto Luke. For me, I wanted to write a book that was a love story, but in which there was a key problem, which was that Luke is not gay. And to see really what it means that a book might just be about what love does to our imagination. So if I were to think about the book as anything, I would think that that's what it's about. It's about James being 15 years old, experiencing love, and having his whole mind kind of rinsed through by this transformative thing that he can't tell whether it's real or not, and he doesn't know whether Luke loves him back or not. That was not an elevator pitch. You'd have been on like the 18th floor by this point.
Well, no, I should have said to you in the beginning, it doesn't matter. We can be in a multi-levered tower, so it's all fine. Brevity was not the key here. The key was expressing what you needed. So that was great. What made you decide to frame it as a memory piece?
Because I wanted you, as a reader, to know right at the start that this whole book and your narrator is not necessarily the oracle of all truth within the book, and that there are many things that he's still struggling to piece together, either the impacts of things or residual guilt he feels, or also I was interested in the way in which small or seemingly small experiences for teenagers, for all of us, become kind of the models on which sometimes we end up living our lives. And I wanted him to have this long look back to try and delve into this year when he was 15, kind of looking for clues about himself.
The book, for me, it's going to forever be the novel that has captured the definition of longing, which I had to even look the word up, the dictionary definition, and it just said a yearning desire, which is, yes. But it's an interesting idea of it, because it's not only James longing for Luke, but it's also a longing to be able to express who he is. It's a longing for acceptance in so many facets of his life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm glad I've kind of hallmarked longing for you. I think
it's an ache.
Yeah, to me, longing is so interesting because I think it's fundamental to love and desire, that we want to possess something, but the second you possess it, you don't long for it anymore. So it's all in the verb of it, rather than in the having of the thing. And to me, James is so situated in this place of longing that it actually begins to act somewhat negatively in his later life, because he realizes that he can't long for something once he's got it, and that turns him into a certain sort of personal, or a certain sort of pattern of relationships. But I wanted to imbue the book with all sorts of different longings, like you said, and both of these boys also long for a different sense of belonging in the world. Luke kind of wants what James has, which is a family and a kind of a nuclear family, a little house and someone to look after him. And James wants to escape all of it because he's ready for his life to start. He's ready for something beyond that. So perhaps cruelly, I put the two characters into this mesh of longing where it's not just kind of romantic longing, or longing for community. It's also a longing for different forms of family life and different ways of being in the world. And sometimes I think that all the different ways in which they're longing are pulling against each other. So, one of them is James is longing for Luke at the same time that Luke is longing for his own father or his parents to love him. And those two things are pulling in the opposite direction, which is where the book kind of became really interesting to me when I set up a problem for these characters. All different sorts of love, all different sorts of longing, kind of pulling against each other.
Yeah, it made me think. I had way back in the day when I was an actor and I was in acting school, one of the professors were talking about in an emotional scene, an actor's impulse to give over and say you have to cry. But she said, that's not interesting. That's the result, right? That's the end. What's interesting is the struggle to not cry and the struggle that fights against that. And that's so much of what this book is.
Yeah.
It's the struggle. And that's what makes it so real and compelling, because you want, as the reader, you're right in there with James so much. It's that articulation of everyone goes through this, right? I feel like this is a rite of passage for especially as a gay man. We all remember this person.
Yeah.
We all have had this person. And it's so universal. And I closed the book and I said, Jesus, I feel so seen. And I'm so beyond this, right? I'm so beyond this point, but in so many facets of what you have created, I just felt so incredibly seen by you and by this character. It's pretty remarkable.
That's really great to hear. I actually, when I was writing the book, I had so many conversations with friends of mine, because I had this kind of theory that the key rite of passage for so many queer people was that our first love was an unreciprocated love for, a straight friend or not even a friend, a boy on the football team or whatever it was. And it turned out to be true over and over again. The more people I spoke to, the more people said, oh yeah, I know him. I still check his Instagram to see if he's come out, or nobody has his life, but I'm still pretty sure that I wasn't making all of that up in my head. And I was just kind of struck by this idea that if we all experience love unreciprocated the first time, love is not necessarily about reciprocation. It's about what it does to us and how much of it is just making up stories, fantasizing. It's quite an internal thing, really. We see love as a kind of two-way street, but oftentimes I think it's something that we invent for ourselves, and we kind of either need someone else to get in on that invention with us, or we can just be an entirely self-sustaining, fictionalizing machine. And I like the idea that you have about you want this character to say something, and I played with that idea for a while, and it just struck me that James is in love with Luke, but he knows that the second he says something, he gets his answer, and having his answer is at one point the source of all possibility. The dream might just come true. He won't have been making it up all along. It's all in his head. It's not all in his head. And on the other hand, it is the ultimate confirmation that he's alone and that he's invented the whole thing. So how could he ever take that gamble? How can he ever say the word? And so the book just exists in that space of him having to deal with the fact that the second he says something, he ends the story, possibly. And all, as much as he is powerless in some ways in the book, he's also has that ultimate power, which is a control, but he chooses not to take it. And so just one word could detonate this whole book. You know?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
But there's also too, don't you think, with so many queer youth, first of all, there is a kind of delayed adolescence that happens
Yeah.
because, and I know things have certainly, thankfully, changed in a lot of ways, despite what's happening. But I think there's so many secrets that you kind of, which again, we're privy to with James. There's so much covering. There's so much fear of, because not only are you speaking to something that, like you said, could detonate an entire thing, but it's also, you have no one to share it with, right?
Yeah.
You have no one, if you are a straight boy or what, sometimes, you know, and you could speak to perhaps a girl that might recognize something, but you're risking a lot. So it's a lot more loaded than just say any kind of like, oh, I'm mooning over this person. I'm mooning over this person who's also, you know, everything that I've been told in society and family and everything is what I'm feeling is 100% wrong, and I should just not even exist.
Yeah. And I wonder if in some way, you know, that kind of plays into the idea that we are people of the theatre and you know, writers or artists or musicians, because, you know, if your sense of expression or sharing things is stymied as an adolescent, perhaps your interior world kind of blossoms or becomes such an important aspect of yourself that your facility with imagination is really spurred by that dead end that and I think that's definitely the case as I see James. His imaginative world kind of goes into overdrive, like love sends his imagination into a sort of overdrive. And part of it is because he can never know. He can't talk about it with anyone. He can't talk to the person he loves about it. His parents are kind of distracted by his younger brother, who we haven't mentioned, I don't think, but Eddie, he has a younger brother.
Right.
And so he exists in this aloneness that is at once a kind of isolated place, and the isolation he feels a lot. He suffers with his isolation. But it is also the place in which all of his dreaming happens. And you asked before about, you know, why frame this as a memory narrative or a look back in time. And I think in some ways it's excavating for James all of that unspoken stuff. You know, he kind of lives inside his head for a large part of this novel during a time that's very pivotal for him. And I think the impulse of his speaking in the novel, like why is he speaking? Why is he telling us this novel? Is in some way because he needs to get it out and he's trying to piece it all back together again, because it was this strange blend of reality and fantasy. And also fantasy has massive real world implications as well. You know, he creates this whole vision, as we all do when we have a crush on someone or we fall in love with someone. You know, you're hearing wedding bells and you're imagining kind of
picking out China patterns.
Parents. Yeah, exactly. And then you bring them to bear on this unsuspecting person who, of course, can't help but not live up to this fantasy because they don't even know that they're inside a fantasy. They're a real person existing somewhere, and you've suddenly slotted them into your fictionalized dream of them. And I do that a lot. And I particularly, I think I'm better at it now, but I used to do it a lot. And I would kind of torture myself with the fantasy of someone and the huge disappointment when they didn't live up to the fantasy.
Sure.
Whether they knew that they were the subject of the fantasy or not.
Yeah, you're not unique in that. I think everybody does that. And you know what? Social media doesn't help that.
No.
Because social media has kind of magnified it to look at someone and, you know, the whole thing of you're seeing this kind of perfection and this wonderful side of them, not to mention these physical sides of them that so many people living out. And you think, oh my God, if only I, you know, so I've always laughed at it because I said social media has become, because I've been married now. I've been with my husband. Well, we've been together for 30 years, but, you know, we've been married for 10. But I've always said, like, social media, it's like window shopping where you could look at things and you can't buy any of it. But
Yeah.
it does, you still just look at things and you think, wow, what would this be like? Or what would that be like? Or
Yeah.
the other person's completely oblivious to all of it.
Yeah. But I think window shopping is a really good way of putting it, in the same way that you might walk down the street and see, an amazing outfit in a window that you can't afford. But suddenly
Right.
you're thinking, like, what would life be like if I was the sort of person that could walk down the street in that outfit? And like, maybe I would be an entirely different person. Maybe life would be different. And I think that social media can do that by giving you this sense of endless optionality in life as well. That you suddenly have a window into 500 different people that you could be, or that you might change into if only things were different. But the fact is, we all have to choose kind of oneself.
Yeah.
We live in.
Yeah, 100%. One of the other interesting things that I think you capture so succinctly, I wanted to read something, and I hope I don't butcher your words.
No.
Because I think you capture so well for, I can only speak to gay men, having lived this experience and continue to kind of wrestle with this. And that is the kind of relationship of being queer and knowing you are to straight men and finding a kind of way to be in communion with them.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very interesting thing that you bring up. It says here, James is saying, as I watched them around school, I saw that all their bravado, their crudeness, sometimes their violence dissipated when they were alone. That was the thing that broke my heart. That made them so perfect to me. I saw that they were soft, and this softness made my heart sore because I knew it was a private thing, an intimate thing that only showed itself when they were unwatched, when they felt safe. Their tenderness was a world I was locked out of, and all I wanted was to be let inside. I felt my most alien, my most distrusted in the changing rooms before sports, when the sight and smell of the boys undressing was almost unbearable. They would play games with each other, whipping up wild laughter and mock fear whenever they saw another boy look at them. And though the rest of them could take it as a joke, could fire back an insult, I knew that if they caught me looking, if the laughter and the fear were directed at me, it would devastate me, because the desire they were afraid of would, in that case, be true. And that's it. Like that, again, all of that came back in startling technicolor. You nailed it. And I wonder what that is sometimes, why that is. As gay men, we sometimes feel this inability to just be with straight men. And I still feel that even now, many times. I check myself, and perhaps some of it's fear. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm certain there's some straight and gay men queer people who don't feel that. But I know a large percentage of us do.
Yeah, I kind of was thinking about this because I think in some ways I'm relatively unusual in that in school I ended up friends with a group of straight friends who now remain some of my closest friends, and there are about 6 or 7 of us. But they were kind of, well, I know this is going on YouTube, but they won't watch it. They were in some ways a kind of misfit group of straight boys who had their own insecurities and their own stuff going on. And maybe in some ways I felt comfortable around them, which meant that I didn't check myself. But often I think there is that sense of discomfort around them. And I think that comes from imagining ourselves as suspicious or as possible sites of discomfort for other people, which is a form of shame, right? And the second we feel that, it's because we feel ashamed of ourselves, or we're made to feel ashamed of ourselves if we feel that we are a site of suspicion or discomfort in a conversation. And inevitably that means, as you said, checking yourself, putting on a performance of being another sort of person. And the only way in which I've found to be very comfortable around straight men is not about myself overcoming shame. It was about them overcoming the discomfort. And I know that that sounds like taking the responsibility out of my hands and putting it onto them. But I think in some ways it's quite inevitable growing up as we have, that we're on the lookout for suspicion, discomfort, slight awkwardness, a rogue word here or there. And you're always going to be looking for that because you're kind of primed to shame yourself. And I think that's a very difficult thing to get out of. There are ways of kind of dispelling it. But I think in a natural state, you're always listening out for it. I think one of the worst places in the world to be is like a barber shop. Because even if you like your own hairdresser, I still sometimes struggle to speak openly with my own hairdresser just because I know that this is a shop full of other straight men. And, you have to kind of talk quite loudly in a barbershop because someone's up behind you. And that's one of the moments in my month where I feel most aware of not being straight. A lot of the other time, I think I'm in my own head just kind of wandering around. I'm not really...
I'm going to bring you to my hairdresser when you get out to LA.
Yeah.
And you will not feel that.
My hairdresser is great. He's straight and good. But... we're not always thinking about being gay.
Right.
Most of the time, your interior monologue doesn't register that. I'm only really gay when I'm like visible, either in a positive way or a negative way to other people. And I think that creates a sort of self-consciousness when you feel that it might be in a negative way rather than a positive.
Yeah, it's also the negative is always and James experiences this many times, the fear of kind of being discovered, of what is the tell that someone who is straight can see something that you in fact are trying to maybe suppress.
Yeah, and I think, the difficulty for James is presented by Luke being a relatively comfortable straight boy, because it's my my thesis is that it's actually very difficult when you're 15 or something to have a very comfortable straight friend because they're not afraid of you, so they will put their arm around you when you're, they'll give you a hug, they'll tell you that they love you or whatever. And that is the most confusing place for James to be, because he's used to straight boys keeping their distance. He's used to only really seeing himself as desirable in secret, as a person that might be decent second option if the straight boys can't get a girl, in a really crap way. Whereas Luke is so disarming to him because he's not vigilant as a straight man. And I think that is kind of the crevice in Luke's personality where James suffers the most. But it's also one of the most positive aspects of his personality. I sometimes feel sorry for Luke because, he allows James to feel things. And in many ways, there's nothing he can do about it.
He's perfect. But there is that. I sat there and said, like I said earlier, we've all had a Luke, but he's written so wonderfully that as the reader, you find yourself falling in love with him as well, which is a big testament to your writing.
I'm glad. I was kind of in love with him by the end. So.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And there's just enough descriptions in terms of his physicality that, it's kind of like fill in the rest here, wherever your mind goes. I couldn't help but, when I was going through this feels like, and maybe it's because I read them back to back, but it feels like it could such be a companion piece to All Down Darkness Wide. Is that a fair assessment? It almost felt like I was at moments living in the early part of James Seán's life before what happens later with All Down Darkness Wide.
Yeah, I mean, I was so conscious having published All Down Darkness Wide, which for listeners is a memoir that was heavy. I think you'll agree. And I often imagine books in terms of kind of sensations or feelings. At least that's how I kind of remember novels that I've read. And I kind of see All Down Darkness Wide as a sort of black or indigo or kind of dark book that's kind of has glinting to it, but is nevertheless dark. And my sense of the novel is that I wanted a kind of brightness or romance and summariness, and so it felt to me like perhaps a companion piece, but like the opposite side.
Sure.
I think, often when we write a memoir, the scary thing is that you give the impression that was the whole side of life. And of course, there were other things happening at the exact same time that were happy or, summery, and you went on lovely holidays and all this sort of stuff. And sometimes maybe you want to balance out the impression. So I think this is it's my attempt at a happy book, even though I think I kind of, my propensity for melancholy probably soured the attempt there, but nevertheless I think it's
let's call it bittersweet.
Bittersweet is perfect, because that is literally the word that I used when I pitched this book to my agent. I said it will be bittersweet, so I'm glad it comes across it.
Yeah, it comes off in a way. It's almost like, well, what I'm about to reference is almost much more kind of, it's a bittersweet. It was just Morris. Yeah. It's in that world, which I have to say, Faber has released these new versions of these E.M. Forster. Have you seen these?
With Luke's?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. With Luke Edward Hall, did the drawings for them. And so when I got 300,000 Kisses, which is also one of your books, with him, I was so excited because I was like, oh my God, it's so timely that both of these things.
Yeah, they look so beautiful. Did he do Howard's End as well, was it? Or
no, just right now it's only A Room with a View and Morris. I'm really hoping they do the rest of them and make it a complete set, because they're just beautiful.
Anyway, I'll leave that as a cliffhanger, because I think I'll spoil the plot if I.
Do you think? Do you have? Before we go, do you have ideas? Are you thinking of what's next? You now have a whole cornucopia of selections. Are you going to go another fiction book, back to poetry?
I am already tentatively began another novel. So, although it's a little bit different, although I won't say too much about it because I'm liable to change my mind. It's going to be set in Dublin and in the 1980s. So I have been in the archives for the past week or two researching really specific things about Dublin that I feel that I need to know before I can start a book set in 1981.
Are you a music person?
I have a playlist that I've been adding to, but I'm welcoming recommendations.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering, because for me, that is one of the best eras of music.
There's a really good playlist that I have at the moment that I'm just listening to on repeat to try and get myself in the headspace of someone in 1981, 1982, which is not, it's a fun way of researching.
Oh my God, it's great.
Wander around and listen to orchestral maneuvers in the dark.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this has just been such a great talk. Your book, again, it's just, I'm going to hold it up again for everyone to see. Please get it. Buy independent if you can. I will link Seán's website below, which has all of his tour dates also listed, that you can check him out worldwide. He's doing a little world.
I need friends in the States, so if you are stateside, come and say hello. I would love to see you.
Yeah, but all of his other books are stunning as well. I will list all those on my bookshop.org page for people to check them out. I'm so excited for you. I can't wait till more people get to experience these two characters and find themselves so overwhelmingly frustrated and and aching, much like James is. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.